You are listening to rudolfsteineraudio.com. If you are listening to the podcast of this, it is located at rudolfsteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. This is a reading of a cycle of lectures by Rudolf Steiner entitled Soul Economy and Waldorf Education, Collected Works, Volume 303, translated by Roland Everett. This is Lecture 3, given in Dornach on the 25th of December, 1921. If you study at greater depth what was brought before you yesterday, you will find that the current interpretation of the world cannot lead to an understanding of the human being. And if you go into further detail of what could be but briefly indicated here, and relate it to specific problems of life, you will find confirmation of all that has been postulated in yesterday's lecture. Now, strangely enough, exponents of the modern worldview seem quite unaware of the significance of their being unable to reach the specifically human sphere. Nor are they willing to admit that in this respect their interpretation of the universe is incomplete. This fact alone more than justifies all the efforts made by anthroposophical research. We shall grasp this situation all the more clearly by observing characteristic examples. When quoting Herbert Spencer, it was not my aim to prove anything. I merely wished to illustrate the modern mode of thinking. Herbert Spencer had already formulated his most important and fundamental ideas before the spreading of Darwinism. This so-called Darwinism aptly demonstrates how scientific, intellectualistic thinking approaches questions and problems which are the outcome of a deep-seated longing in the human soul. Charles Darwin's book, titled The Origin of the Species, published in 1858, certainly represents a landmark in modern spiritual life. His method of observation and the way in which he draws his conclusions are exemplary for a modern conceptual discipline. One can truly say that Charles Darwin observed the data offered to his sense perceptions with utmost exactitude, and that he searched for the underlying laws in quite a masterly fashion, taking into consideration everything that such observed phenomena could teach to his powers of comprehension. Never did he allow himself to be deflected, not even to the slightest degree, by his own subjectivity. He developed the habit of learning from the outer world in a way commensurate with the human intellect. Observing life in this way, Darwin was able to trace a link between the simplest, that is, the least developed organisms, and the highest organism found on Earth, man himself. The entire range of living organisms was contemplated by him in a strictly natural scientific manner. But what he actually observed was external to and not part of the essentially human nature. Neither the real being of man nor his spiritual aspirations were the object of his inquiry. However, when Darwin finally had to face an impasse, he reacted in a characteristic manner. For after having formulated his excellent conclusions, he now asked himself, why should it not have pleased the divine Creator just as much to begin his creation with a small number of comparatively undeveloped and primitive organic forms, which he gradually allowed to develop further, as to miraculously conjure forth fully developed forms right at the beginning of the world? But what does such a reaction signify? It shows that a personality who has made the intellectualistic, naturalistic outlook his own applies it as far as a certain inner sensing will allow him to go, and that then he is prepared to accept newly found boundaries without pondering too much whether possibilities exist of transcending them. In actual fact, he is even ready to fall back on traditional religious conceptions. Also, in his subsequent book, titled The Descent of Man, Darwin did not fundamentally modify his views. Apart from being a characteristic example of the times, Darwin's attitude also reveals certain national features, characteristic of Anglo-American attitudes, and differing from those of Middle Europe. For if one looks at modern life with open eyes, one can learn a great deal about such national characteristics. In Germany, Darwinism was received at first with open enthusiasm, which, however, spread into two opposite directions. There was, first of all, Ernst Haeckel, who with youthful ardor took up Darwin's methods of observation, valid only in non-human domains. But according to his Germanic disposition, he was not prepared to accept given boundaries with Darwin's natural grace. Haeckel did not capitulate to traditional religious conceptions, speaking of an Almighty who had created some imperfect archetypes. Using Darwin's excellent methods, relevant only for the non-human realm, as a basis for a new religion, Ernst Haeckel included both God and man in his considerations, thus deliberately crossing the boundary hitherto accepted by Darwin. Dubois-Reymond took up Darwinism in another way. According to his views, the naturalistic, intellectualistic mode of thought can only be applied to the non-human realm. He therefore remained within its limits. But he did not stop there, unquestioning and guided by his feelings, but made this stopping point itself into a theory. Just there where Darwin's observations tail off into the undefined, Dubois-Reymond postulated an alternative, stating, either there are limits or there are no limits. And he found two such limits. One, when we turn our gaze outward into the world, we are confronted with matter. The second limit is when we turn our gaze inward to the experiences of our own consciousness, and find also these ultimately impenetrable. He therefore concluded that we have no means of reaching the supersensible, and made this into a theory. One would have to rise to the level of supernaturalism, that is the realm where religion may hold sway. But science has nothing to do with what belongs to this religious sphere. In this way, Dubois-Reymond leaves everyone free to supplement, according to personal needs, all that has been substantiated by natural science with either mystical or traditionally accepted forms of religious beliefs. But he insists that such supernatural beliefs could never be subject to scientific scrutiny. The characteristic difference between the Middle European and the Western people lies in that the latter naturally lean toward the practical side of life. Consequently, they are quite prepared to allow their thoughts to tail off into what cannot be defined, just as it happens in practical life. Among Middle Europeans, on the other hand, there is a tendency of putting up with impracticalities as long as the train of thought remains theoretically consistent, until an either-or situation has been reached. And this we can see particularly clearly when fundamental issues regarding ultimate questions are at stake. But there is still a third book written by Darwin which deals with the expression of feeling, titled The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. To anyone who occupies himself with the problems of the soul, this work appears to be of far greater importance than his title Origin of the Species and title The Descent of Man. If one lets this book, so full of fine observations regarding the expression of human emotions, work upon oneself, one can derive great satisfaction from it. For it shows that a person who has disciplined himself to observe in the natural scientific manner can also achieve faculties which are very well suited for research into the soul and spiritual sphere of man. It goes without saying that Darwin advanced along this road only as far as his instinct would allow him to go. Nevertheless, the excellence of his observations shows that a training in natural scientific observation can also lead to an ability of penetrating into the realm of the supersensible. On this fact rests the hope of anthroposophical endeavor, which does not wish to depart by a hair's breadth in any task that it undertakes from the disciplined training of the natural scientific method of thought. But at the same time, anthroposophy wishes to demonstrate how the natural scientific mode of working can be developed further, thereby transcending the practical limits established by Darwin, crossed so boldly with Haeckel's naturalism, and laid down as a theory by Du Bois-Reymond. It endeavors to show how the supersensible world can be reached so that real knowledge of man can finally be attained. The first step towards such higher knowledge does not take us directly into the world of education, which is to be our central theme during the coming days, but it consists of our trying to build a bridge from ordinary conceptual and emotional life to supersensible cognition. This can be achieved if, using ordinary means of cognition, we learn to apprehend the characteristic nature of the sense-bound interpretation of the world. In order to do so, I should like you to accept two hypotheses. Suppose that from our childhood days on, the world of matter had been transparent and clear to our understanding. Suppose that the material world surrounding us were not impermeable to our gaze, but that with our ordinary sense observation and thinking, we were able to penetrate and fully grasp its nature. If this were the case, we should be able to comprehend the material aspect of the mineral kingdom. We should also be able to understand the physical aspect of man. The human body would become entirely transparent to our gaze. However, if such an hypothesis were reality, you would have to eliminate from your mind something without which real life could not exist. You would have to think away all that we mean when we speak of love. For what does love depend upon? Be it love for another person, or for mankind in general, or for spiritual beings. It depends on our meeting the other person or being with forces which are totally different from those which illuminate our thoughts. If transparent or abstract thoughts were to light up as soon as we met another being, then even the very first seeds of love would immediately be destroyed. We simply would be unable to engender love. You only need to remember how in ordinary life love ceases to be when the light of abstract thought takes over. You only need to remember how right it is to speak of the coldness of abstract thoughts, how all inner warmth ceases when we approach the thinking realm. Warmth, revealing itself through love, could not come into being if we met outer material life only with our intellect. Love would be extinguished from our world. And now, suppose that there were nothing to prevent you from looking into your own inner organization, that when turning your gaze inward, you could perceive the forces and the weaving of substances within you with the same clarity with which you can see colors or hear tones in the outer world. If this were to happen, you would have the possibility of continuously experiencing your own inner being. However, in this case too, you would have to eliminate something from your mind without which the human being could not exist in the world as it is today. For what is it that lights up within you when you turn your gaze inward? You behold memory pictures of what you have experienced in the outer world. In actual fact, when looking inward, you do not see your inner being at all. You only see the reflection, the memory pictures of what you have experienced in the world. If you consider that on the one hand, without this faculty of remembering, without memory, personal life would not be possible, and on the other, that in order to perceive your own inner life, you would have to eliminate your memory, you will recognize the necessity of the limit inbuilt into our human organization. The possibility of clearly perceiving the nature of outer matter would presuppose a human being devoid of love. The possibility of perpetually perceiving one's own inner organization would presuppose a human being devoid of the faculty of remembering. Thus, the two hypotheses help us to realize the necessity of the two limits set to human nature in ordinary life and in ordinary consciousness. They exist for the sake of the development of love and because of the need of personal memories for man's inner life. But if there is a path beyond these boundaries into the supersensible world, the obvious question arises: can we tread this path without, on the one hand, damaging our personal life, and on the other, shunning social life with our fellows? Anthroposophy has the courage to declare that with the usual and established naturalistic approach, it is not possible to attain to supersensible knowledge. But at the same time, it must raise the question: are there any means which, when applied with the strict discipline of natural science, will enable us to enter supersensible realms? We cannot accept the statement that the crossing of the threshold into the supernatural world marks the boundary of scientific investigation. It is the aim of anthroposophy to open up a path into the supersensible by using equally exact means with which hitherto accepted science has succeeded in penetrating into the sense-perceptible world. In this way, anthroposophy is merely continuing to tread the path of modern science. Anthroposophy does not wish to rebel against present achievements, but it endeavors to bring what is needed in our time and what contemporary life cannot provide out of its own resources. If one looks at Darwin's attitude in the way I have presented it, one might feel prompted to say, well, if science can deal only with what is sense-perceptible, and if, therefore, one has to fall back on religious beliefs in order to approach what is supersensible, one simply has to accept the situation as being inevitable. Such a response, however, would do nothing to solve the fundamental and urgent human problems of our times. In this context, I should like to speak about two characteristic aspects of present-day life, because, apart from supplementing what has been said already, they also throw light on educational questions. They may help to illustrate how modern intellectual thinking, which is striving for absolute lucidity, nevertheless is prone to drift into the dark domains of the unconscious and instinctive. If you observe man's attitude toward the world in past ages, you will find that in ancient times religion was never looked upon as mere faith. This only happened in later times. But that religions were based on direct experience and on insight into the spiritual worlds. The knowledge thus gained was considered to be as real as are the results of our modern natural scientific investigations. Only in subsequent ages was knowledge confined to what is sense-perceptible, and consequently supersensible knowledge was relegated to the religious realm. And so the illusion came about that anything pertaining to metaphysical existence could be only a matter of faith. Yet, as long as religions rested on supersensible knowledge, this knowledge bestowed great power, affecting even the physical nature of man. Our modern civilization is not able to generate this kind of moral strength for the man of today. For when religion has become only a matter of faith, it loses power. It can no longer work down into man's physical constitution. Though this is instinctively felt nowadays, its importance is not recognized. This instinctive feeling and searching for revitalizing forces has found an outlet which has become a distinctive feature of our civilization, and which belongs to all that we call sports. Religion has lost the power of strengthening man's physical constitution. Therefore, an instinctive urge has arisen in people to gain access to such a source of strength by outward physical means only. As life tends toward polarizations, we find that man instinctively wants to substitute the loss of invigoration previously drawn from his religious experiences by cultivating sportsmanship. I have no wish to harangue against sports. Neither do I wish to belittle their positive aspects. In fact, I feel confident that these activities eventually will develop in a healthy manner. Nevertheless, it must be said that sport will take on an altogether different position in human life from that of today, where it is a substitute for religious experience. Such a statement may well appear paradoxical, but truth today is paradoxical, because modern civilization has drifted into so many cross currents. A second characteristic of our intellectual and naturalistic civilization is that instead of embracing life in full, it tends to lead to soul-destroying contradictions. A person's thinking is driven along until it becomes entangled in chaotic thought webs and contradictions, without his or her becoming aware of the confusion wrought. For example, the fact that a young child, to a certain extent, will go through the various stages mankind has passed through from the days of primitive man up to our present civilization, fills certain naturalistic intellectuals with admiration. They observe the somewhat turned-up nostrils of a young child and the position of the eyes, which lie further apart than in later life. They observe the formation of the forehead with its characteristic curvature, and also the shape of the mouth. All these features are reminiscent of those found in primitive tribes, and so they look upon the young child as being a young savage. Yet at the same time, sentiments such as those expressed by Rousseau are trying to rise to the surface, sentiments which are completely at loggerheads with what has just been said. When contemplating educational aims, some people wish to, quote, return to nature, close quote, both from a physical and moral aspect. But, being under the influence of an intellectual atmosphere, they soon aim at arranging educational ideas according to the principles of logic, for intellectuality will always lead to logic in the thinking realm. Observing many illogical features in present education, they now wish to base it upon principles of logic, which in their eyes are entirely compatible with the child's natural development. Logic, however, does not meet the needs of the child at all. One close look at primitive races will make one realize soon enough that members of such tribes hardly apply logical thinking in their ways of living. And so some reformers are under the illusion that they are returning to nature by introducing a logical attitude in educating the young, who are supposed to be little savages, an attitude which is altogether alien to the child. In this way, adherents of Rousseau's message find themselves caught in a strange contradiction with an intellectualistic attitude. Striving to live in harmony with nature does not fit into an intellectualistic outlook. And as far as the education of the will is concerned, the intellectualistic thinker finds himself completely out of touch with reality. According to his ways of thinking, the child should, above all, be taught what is useful in life. For instance, such people never tire of pointing out the impracticability of our modern mode of dress, which does not satisfy the demands of utility. They advocate that in order to return to more natural ways, we should concentrate on the utilitarian aspects of life. Especially the education of girls is criticized most sharply by such reformers. And now they are faced with a paradoxical situation. Did primitive man, whose stage young people are supposed to recapitulate, live a life of utility? Certainly not. According to the findings of archaeologists, he neither developed logic in his thinking nor utility in his living. His essential needs were satisfied through the help of his inborn instincts. But what was it that captivated the interest of primitive man? Adornment. He did not wear clothing for practical reasons, but out of a longing for self-adornment. Whatever the members of such tribes chose to wear or not to wear in order to be able to show the patterns painted on their skin was not intended to serve useful purposes, but was an expression of their yearning for beauty, as they understood it. Similar traits can also be found in the young child. If a person interested in education thinks along rational and logical lines, and in terms of what is practical and useful in life, and if, on the other hand, he or she feels pulled in the direction of Rousseau's call to return to nature, he will find himself victim of strange contradictions. What he really does is to pass on to the child what appears to him of value to himself as a grown-up. He tries to graft onto the child something which is entirely alien to the child's own nature. Children really do seek, only in different ways from those advocated by Rousseau, for beauty, which for them neither expresses the good nor the useful, but which exists for its own sake. Anyone able to perceive these contradictions and imperfections in modern life will be ready to look for their causes, and he will recognize, more and more, how one-sided and limited the generally accepted, intellect-based, naturalistic mode of thinking is, which does not look upon man in his entirety at all. Usually only man's waking state is taken account of, whereas in reality the hours spent in sleep are just as much part of human life as those of his day consciousness. You may object by saying that natural science has closely examined also the sleeping state of man, and indeed there exist many interesting theories about the nature of sleep and of dreams. But all these are premises made by persons in their waking state, and not by investigators who are able to penetrate the domains of sleep. In his waking state, man not only has consciousness, he also undergoes inner experiences, and he takes on an active part in life. During sleep, on the other hand, he loses his ordinary consciousness, and consequently he can examine sleep only from the perspective of the awake person. However, a proper study of such a life phenomenon demands more than an abstract theory. To be able to enter sleep life in full consciousness is an essential prerequisite for its understanding. Though experiencing both wonder and astonishment when studying the phenomena of sleep, a serious and unbiased investigator is not likely to advance further along lines which, for example, Greek philosophy considered to be of importance. According to an ancient Greek adage, every philosophy, as a path toward cognition, begins with wonder. But this indicates only the beginning of the search for insight. One must move on. One must progress from wonder to cognition. However, the first step towards supersensible knowledge must not be made with the expectation of one's being able to enter the spiritual world directly, but rather with the intent of building a bridge from the ordinary sense-perceptible world to supersensible knowledge. One way of achieving this is by applying the same discipline with which we have learned to observe the phenomena of the sense-perceptible world to what comes to us from the realms of sleep and of dreams. Modern man certainly has learned to observe accurately. But in this case, it is not just a matter of observing accurately. In order to gain insight, one has to be able to direct one's observations to specific areas. I should like to give you an example of how this can be done when studying the phenomena of dreams, which infiltrate into our waking life in strange and mysterious ways. Here and there, one still comes across people who have remained aware of the characteristic difference between waking and sleeping, but their awareness has become only a dim and vague feeling. Nevertheless, such people are aware that an awake person is an altogether different kind of creature from the one who is asleep. Therefore, when they are told that sleep is a waste of time, and that a sleeper is an idle and lazy fellow, these simple minds will answer, quote, "As long as we sleep, we are free from sin." Close quote. In this way they wish to express that man, whom they consider to be a sinful creature as long as he is awake, is innocent while he sleeps. A good instinctive wisdom is hidden in this somewhat naive attitude. But in order to reach clarity, one needs to train one's own observation. I wish to give you an example. Surely there are some among you, perhaps all of you, who have had dreams which are reminiscent of what might have happened to you in daily life. For example, you may have dreamt that you were taken to a river and that somehow you had to get across. So you found yourself searching for a boat, which after a great deal of trouble you managed to secure. Now you had to make great efforts to row across. In your dream you may have felt the physical exertion of plying the oars until at last you managed to get across, just as it might have happened in waking life. There are many such kinds of dreams. Their contents are definite reminiscences of our physical and sense-perceptible lives. But there are also other kinds of dreams which do not echo our waking life. For instance, someone again may dream that he or she has to cross a river. Wondering how this urge could possibly be fulfilled, the dreamer suddenly is able to spread his wings and, hey, presto, he simply flies across to land safely on the opposite bank. Such a dream certainly is not a reminiscence of what happens in waking life, because, to my knowledge, this is hardly the way ordinary mortals transport themselves across a river in real life. Here we have something which simply does not exist in physical life. And now, if we accurately observe the relationship between sleeping and waking life, we shall discover something really interesting. We shall find that the kind of dreams in which we experience the toil and exhaustion of waking life, dreams which reflect our waking life, make us wake up tired. On waking, our limbs feel heavy, and tiredness seems to drag on throughout the course of the day. With other words, if strains and pains of a life of drudgery reappear in our dreams, we wake up weakened rather than refreshed. But now observe the effects of the other kind of dream. If you have managed to fly weightlessly and with hearty enthusiasm, with wings which you do not possess in ordinary life, once you have flown across your river, you wake up bright and breezy, and your limbs feel light. We need to observe these differing effects of dreams on the waking life with the same accuracy with which we make our observations in mathematics or in physics. We know quite well that we should not get far in these two subjects without it. Yet dreams are not generally made the object of exact observations, and consequently no satisfactory results are achieved in this field. And such a situation hardly encourages people to strive for greater powers of insight into these somewhat obscure spheres of life. It is not just a case of putting forward some isolated glimpses of something which apparently confirms previous indications. The more one ponders about the relevant facts, the more such reciprocal links between sleeping and waking life become evident. For instance, there are dreams in which you may see some very tasty dishes, which you then enjoy with a hearty appetite. You will find that usually, after having thus eaten in your dreams, you wake up without much appetite. You may even not eat during the following day, as if there were something wrong with your digestion. On the other hand, if in your dream you had the experience of speaking to an angel, and if you entered fully into a dialogue with him, you will awake with a keen edge to your appetite, which may persist during the whole of the day. Needless to say, partaking of food in one's dream represents a memory picture from waking life, for in the spiritual world one neither eats nor drinks. This surely you will accept without further proof. Therefore, enjoying food during a dream is a reminiscence of physical life, whereas speaking to an angel, an event which is unlikely to happen to people nowadays, is something which cannot be looked upon as an echo of daily life. Such an observation alone could show even an abstract thinker that something quite unknown happens to us in sleep, something which, nevertheless, plays into our daily lives. It is wrong to surmise that it is not possible to gain exact and clear conceptions in this realm. For is it not a clearly defined discovery that dreams echoing earthly reality, the kind so popular among naturalistic poets, ever eager to imitate earthly life and never ready to enter the supersensible realms, that such dreams have an unhealthy effect upon our waking lives? If ordinary life impressions reappear in dreams, these dreams have an injurious effect upon our health. On the other hand, if unrealistic dream pictures appear, the kind which would be so scornfully dismissed as mystical rubbish by an intellectualistic Philistine, these will make us feel bright and fresh upon awakening in the morning. It is certainly possible to observe the strange interplay and the reciprocal effects between dreaming and sleeping. And so we can say, something which is independent of man's physical condition must be happening to him during sleep, the effects of which we can observe in his physical organism. Dreams cause astonishment and wonder to ordinary consciousness because they elude us in our waking state. The more you try to collect such examples, the more you will find a real connection between man's sleeping and waking state. You only need to look closely at dreams to find their characteristic difference from what we experience in waking life. When awake, we are able to link or to separate mental images at will. This we cannot do when dreaming. The dream pictures are woven as objective appearances which lie beyond the influence of our will. In dream, the activities of the soul become passive, benumbed, and paralyzed. If we study dreams from yet another aspect, we shall find that they can reveal to us other secret sides of human existence. Observe, for instance, your judgment of people with whom you may have a certain relationship in life. You may find that you do not allow your full inner feelings of sympathy or antipathy to rise to the level of consciousness, and that your judgment of such people is colored by varying facts, such as their titles or their positions in social life, etc. However, when you dream about such a personality, something quite unexpected may happen. You may find yourself giving him a thorough hiding. Such behavior, so completely at odds with your attitude in waking life, allows you a glimpse into the more hidden regions of your sympathies and antipathies, some of which you would never dare to admit even to yourself while awake, but which the dream conjures up in your soul. Subconscious images are placed before the dreaming soul. These are comparatively easy to observe. But if you were to investigate at depth certain inexplicable moods of a person, moods of ill temper or of euphoria, which cannot be attributed to outer circumstances, you would find that they too were caused by dreams, completely forgotten by the people concerned. What is experienced in sleep and what may become revealed through dreams works into the unconscious and may lead to apparently inexplicable moods. Unless we consider this other side of life, this hidden domain of man's sleep life, by making exact investigations, we cannot understand human life in its totality. However, all these reciprocal effects happen without man's participation. Yet it is possible to lift what is thus happening unconsciously and involuntarily to a state of clear consciousness, which is equal to that of a person engaged in mathematics or other scientific investigations. When achieving this, one's powers of observation are enhanced beyond the indeterminate relationship between waking and sleeping to the fully conscious states of imagination, inspiration, and intuition. Only through these three capacities is it possible to attain to a true knowledge of man. What life vaguely hints at through the phenomenon of sleep can be developed in full consciousness by applying methods given by anthroposophy, which strive toward a real knowledge of the world and of man. The end of Lecture 3.